piston. But look closely, it isn't round, it's oval. And this single strange shape cost Honda a fortune, wounded its pride for over a decade, and produced the most expensive motorcycle in the world. In 1979, Honda returned to Grand Prix racing after 12 years away. They came back with a machine so ambitious, so complex, that rival teams thought they'd lost their minds. They were nearly right. This is where that madness ended up. The Honda NR750 of 1992. $50,000, carbon fiber, titanium, and an engine that functioned like nothing else on the road. To understand the NR750, you have to understand the disaster that came before it. A racing project nicknamed Never Ready. A 10-year fight against the laws of physics. This is the story of how Honda's refusal to build a normal engine became both its greatest embarrassment and its ultimate statement of engineering arrogance. First, some background. In the 1960s, Honda dominated Grand Prix racing with screaming multi-cylinder four-stroke engines. Then, in 1967, they abruptly walked away to focus on building cars. While Honda was gone, the sport transformed. Two-stroke engines took over completely. Lighter, simpler, and making far more power for their size than any four-stroke could. There was a problem. Soichiro Honda, the founder, disliked two-strokes intensely. He reportedly compared them to bamboo contraptions. When Honda returned, it would return with a four-stroke. That was non-negotiable. But the rules created a trap. Grand Prix regulations limited engines to a maximum of 4 cylinders, and a 4-cylinder four-stroke simply couldn't rev high enough to match the two-strokes. Here's the physics. To make more power, you rev higher. To rev higher safely, you want more, smaller cylinders. Honda wanted a V8. The rules said 4 cylinders only. They were stuck. So in 1977, at Honda's Osaka Research Center, a secret project began. A small team was given an almost impossible brief. Build a 4-cylinder engine that behaves like an 8. The project was led by engineer Shoichiro Irimajiri. His radical proposal: don't make the pistons round, make them oval. Stretch each cylinder into an ellipse. The logic was brilliant. An oval piston has room for 8 valves, 4 intake, 4 exhaust, and 2 spark plugs. Effectively, each cylinder does the breathing work of 2. 4 oval cylinders, each with 8 valves, gave 32 valves total, exactly like a V8. On paper, Honda had found the perfect loophole. Technically a 4-cylinder, functionally a V8. But an oval piston creates brutal problems. It's unstable. To stop it rocking as it changes direction, each one needed not 1 connecting rod, but 2. The complexity was staggering. Then there were the piston rings. Making a round ring seal is routine. Making an oval ring seal, at the tolerances required, pushed the very limits of what machines of the era could produce. Because there were 2 rods, the pin joining them had to be unusually long, and long pins flex under extreme force. Every solution to one problem created a brand new problem. Development was painstaking. It started with tiny single-cylinder test engines in 1978, building slowly toward the full 4-cylinder prototype. The team was racing a clock and losing. On the test bench, the engine destroyed itself repeatedly. Broken parts, twisted rods, failed valves, shredded gear trains. Above 10,000 revolutions per minute, it simply began tearing itself apart. The engineers identified the killer. Above 10,000 revolutions per minute, the twin connecting rods twisted. That twist pulled the piston pin out of alignment, and the whole assembly broke. The faster it spun, the worse it got. Around this engine, Honda built an equally radical chassis, an aluminum monocoque frame, upside-down forks, carbon brakes, technology that wouldn't become normal for another 20 years. The machine was named NR500, New Racing. But as the failures mounted, paddock wits gave it a crueler name. The initials NR, they said, stood for Never Ready. The debut came at the 1979 British Grand Prix at Silverstone. Years of secret work, millions spent. the eyes of the racing world watching, and it went catastrophically wrong. The bikes barely qualified. Then, rider Mick Grant crashed at the very first corner. His teammate, Takazumi Katayama, retired soon after with engine trouble. Both machines were out, publicly humiliated. Against the nimble, powerful two-strokes, the heavy, complex NR750 was hopelessly outclassed. It wasn't just losing, it was being lapped and left behind. That first year, the NR750 scored a single world championship point. 1. For a company of Honda's stature, and after all that investment, it was a shattering result. It got worse. At the French Grand Prix, both bikes failed to even qualify for the race. One engineer later admitted tears welled up in his eyes. Every other bike on the grid was a two-stroke. Any sane company would have quit. Honda doubled down. New frames, new cooling systems, more power. Version after version. The engineers refused to admit the concept was beaten. And slowly, the numbers climbed. The 2X and 3X versions of the engine reached 135 horsepower, spinning to nearly 20,000 revolutions per minute. The oval piston was finally working. In 1981, redemption of a kind. At the Suzuka 500-kilometer race, Kengo Kiyama rode the NR750 to victory. After years of failure, the oval piston engine had finally won something. It ran competitively at Laguna Seca, too. The machine that couldn't qualify 2 years earlier was now, occasionally, genuinely fast. But it was too little, far too late. Because in 1982, Honda quietly did the unthinkable. They built a two-stroke, the NS500. The engine Soichiro Honda hated, and it immediately proved faster and more reliable than the NR ever was. The two-stroke NS500 went on to win championships. The oval-piston Grand Prix dream was over. As a racing project, the NR500 had failed almost completely. Over its entire racing life, the oval-piston project delivered Honda just 2 race wins. Measured against the money and years poured in, it was one of the most expensive failures in racing history. But here's the twist. That failed team included Takeo Fukui, who became president of Honda, and other engineers who went on to lead HRC, Honda's racing division. Failure had forged them. And the technology didn't die. Carbon brakes, upside-down forks, rising rate suspension, the slipper clutch, all pioneered on the NR750, all standard on MotoGP bikes today. The failure seeded the future. Honda had proved the oval piston could be built. They just hadn't proved it could win. And for a company built on pride, that unfinished business gnawed at them. Through the 1980s, the oval piston engine reappeared in 750 cubic centimeter endurance racing form. And in 1990, at the Suzuka 8-Hour, the traveling marshals rode an NR750 around the track. The world took notice. Then Honda made a decision that had nothing to do with profit. They would build a road-going version. Not to sell in numbers, to prove, once and for all, that they could. In 1992, the Honda NR was born, officially just NR, informally the NR750, internally the RC40. The most technologically extravagant motorcycle any major manufacturer had ever offered the public. At its heart, a 747 cubic centimeters, 90-degree V4, oval pistons, 8 valves per cylinder, 32 in total, 2 titanium connecting rods per piston, 2 spark plugs and 2 fuel injectors per cylinder. The road engine refined the idea. Where the NR750 used flat-sided pistons, the NR750 used a true elliptical shape with curved sides. The lessons of a decade of failure distilled into production. The result was around 125 horsepower at 14,000 revolutions per minute, a huge figure for a 750 in 1992, with a red line near 15,000. Almost race car territory on the street. The bodywork was carbon fiber, said to be the first production sport bike so equipped. Underneath sat magnesium wheels, titanium parts, and engineering borrowed straight from the racetrack. A single-sided swing arm, side-mounted radiators, an exhaust exiting under the seat, details now common, but startling in 1992. Every surface was a showcase of what Honda could do. Even the windscreen was coated in titanium, giving it a faint, iridescent shimmer. The ignition key was shaped like an oval piston with a carbon inlay. No detail was too small. The paint was a deep, complex red, reportedly a nightmare to match if damaged. This wasn't a motorcycle built to a budget. It was a motorcycle built to make a statement. And the statement had a price: 50,000 US dollars. In the UK, 38,000 pounds. It was, by a huge margin, the most expensive production motorcycle in the world. To put that in perspective, it cost roughly 5 times more than Honda's own flagship sport bike. For the price of one NR, you could buy a fleet of faster motorcycles. And here's the uncomfortable truth. For all its exotica, the NR750 wasn't the fastest bike you could buy. Cheaper, simpler machines with round pistons were quicker in a straight line. Nobody walked into a dealership needing this bike. Nobody was asking whether their sport bike had enough connecting rods. The NR750 answered a question the market had never asked. Honda knew exactly what it was doing. The sales brochure spoke of dreams and determination. This was corporate showing off, a machine built purely to prove Honda could build the impossible. Only around 320 were built. A handful were detuned versions for certain markets. This was among the first true, limited edition, ultra-expensive bikes from a mainstream maker. They sold slowly. At that price, to that tiny audience, they were always going to. But eventually, every single one found a buyer. And then something interesting happened. The NR750 became a legend precisely because it made no financial sense. Today, these bikes change hands for well into 6 figures, far more than their original, already terrifying price. Collectors don't chase it for speed, they chase it for what it represents. The physical proof of an idea most engineers said was impossible, carried all the way to a showroom floor. The idea still echoes. Decades later, when Ferrari filed a patent for oval-shaped pistons, enthusiasts everywhere pointed out the obvious. Honda got there first, in the 1970s. Honda never built another oval piston engine after the NR750. They went back to round pistons, like everyone else, and have stayed there ever since. The experiment was truly finished. One engineer summed it up perfectly. Looking back, he said, he wasn't sure whether they'd been experimenting with cutting-edge technology or obsessed with a foolish idea. Perhaps it was both. That's the paradox of the NR. As a race bike, it failed. As a road bike, it lost money and answered no demand. And yet, it may be the most respected motorcycle Honda ever made. Did it nearly break Honda? Not financially. Honda was far too large for that. But it broke something else, the belief that engineering ambition should ever be limited by mere common sense. For over a decade, the oval piston consumed Honda's best engineers, its money, and its pride. It humiliated them publicly and frustrated them privately. It was, by any normal measure, a mistake. But that mistake trained future company presidents, invented technologies that define modern racing, and produced a machine that still stops people in their tracks 30 years later. The oval piston engine is now displayed in museums as a piece of mechanical sculpture. Not because it worked better than anything else, because it should never have existed at all. Ask a Honda engineer about the NR, and you'll get a complicated look. Pride and pain tangled together. It was their greatest failure and their proudest achievement, wearing the same red paint. 32 valves, 8 connecting rods, 4 oval pistons dancing at 15,000 revolutions per minute, a 4-cylinder engine pretending, brilliantly and expensively, to be a V8. Every strange, beautiful, over-engineered detail on the NR750 exists because Honda refused to accept a limit, because a rulebook said no, and Honda decided to invent a way around it. It nearly broke them in spirit, if not in balance sheet. It tested the limits of their engineers, their patience, and their pride, and in the end, they built it anyway. No motorcycle since has been quite so uncompromising, so gloriously unnecessary. The NR750 stands as a monument to a company willing to spend a fortune chasing an idea just to prove it could. That's the real story of the oval piston experiment. It failed at almost everything it set out to do, and in failing, it became one of the most extraordinary machines ever built. That's the price of a dream.